you're going to study a text, any text, how do you look at it? How do you read at it? Read it. What do you expect from it? What kinds of tools do you bring to looking at it and reading it and trying to understand it? Different texts have different purposes. If you don't know the purpose of the text, you don't know how to read it, and you certainly don't know how to evaluate it. Someone reads a play by Shakespeare, and he says, this guy's a bum. None of the things in this story happened. They didn't happen. There were never such people, there were never such speeches, there were never such battles. None of it happened. What kind of ridiculous nonsense is this? What will we tell him? Sorry, this is not a history book. Shakespeare's not history. Shakespeare's supposed to portray how human beings think, how they feel, how they react, their ideals, their failures, and that he does very well. And he wasn't here to write history. It's not a history book. If you don't know the purpose of the book, then you don't know how to read it. Different cultures may have different uses for their books. That makes it even harder. You have to first figure out what did the culture use the book for, and then you can know how to read the book and how to understand what the book is supposed to communicate. Okay, let's say we're talking about the 5 books of Moses, the Chumash. So now, the author of that book is God, letter by letter. So when you have an author, he's the one to tell you what he was doing when he wrote it, what he expects you to get out of it. And he did. He told us. And here's the bottom line. This is a single text that communicates on many different levels at the same time. It's a multi-layered text. And God told us how to decode the information in the text on each layer. Each layer has its own method for extracting the communication. Now, since God is the author, he can do it any way he wants. It's his book. He gave us a list. Each of the items on the list is a way that he's communicating to us through this text. As a matter of fact, one of the ways that he communicates to us through the text is the literal meaning of the text. It didn't have to be that way. It didn't have to be that way. Think of Shakespeare again. The literal meaning of the plays in Shakespeare is false, because the things he described never happened. Antony said this, Cleopatra said that, King James said that. All false. We say, so what? Because that's not how Shakespeare's plays communicate. They don't communicate by the literal meaning of the words. They communicate a different way. So when you understand that the book was written by God and is designed to communicate in a variety of ways simultaneously, you realize there's no reason for there to be anything in the literal meaning of the words at all. It doesn't have to be that way. And indeed, there are poetical passages or passages that exaggerate where the literal meaning of the text is false. And we know that. When the Torah describes cities fortified to the heavens, the Talmud already says that that's not true. No city is fortified to the heavens. So it's an exaggeration for the sake of poetry, to explain how people felt when they looked at it, but it isn't literally true. Now there's something in understanding, getting the communication from the text called pshat. Pshat is roughly the literal, logical meaning of the text. People have an overwhelming instinct to think that's what the text really is. That's what the text really says. That's what the text really means. Everything else is fluff. Everything else is imagination. Everything else is subjective. That's exactly wrong. It's exactly wrong. Nothing about the text gets any claim to fame except that the author says, here's how I communicated to you through the text. If he gives you a list and one of them happens to be pshat, pshat is no better than anything else. It's just one of the many ways in which the text communicates. Now Rashi, as is customary, I won't say every author does this, but it's customary, careful authors, explains to you the method of his work. And he does so in the very second item in Bereshis, the first he probably meant to honor his father. although there's some discussion about that. But the second one is where he explains his methodology. I'm going to explain to you this Rashi in detail. I'm not going to follow his exact order or phraseology because he wasn't writing for us. He's writing for people who were well versed in the tradition and for whom the vocabulary was well known and who had a certain style of thinking. But all the content that I'm giving you is Rashi's content. The first two words of the Bible have a grammatical contradiction. What a way to start. Because Bereshis is in Reshis. Does anybody here know any Hebrew? A little bit? How do you translate Reshis?
Beginning.
So far, both are wrong. Reshis. I'll give you a hint. No, I'll give you a hint. Reshis HaSefer means the beginning of the book. HaSefer means the book. So what does Reshis mean?
Beginning.
Again, listen again. Reshis HaSefer means beginning of the book. Sefer, HaSefer means the book. So Reshis has to mean?
Beginning of the.
Well, you can leave out the, that's HaSefer, the beginning of. Reshis means beginning of. It's what's called a smichus form in Hebrew grammar. It's beginning of. Okay, what kind of word or phrase has to come after the of in English grammar? English grammar? After beginning of the book, beginning of the century, beginning of the dance, beginning of Moby Dick, beginning of, it's got to be a noun. Name of a place, person, place, thing, object, right? Something like that. Ah, but at the beginning of the Torah, it's a verb. Bara is a verb. Created. Beginning of created. What? Doesn't read in English. It doesn't read in Hebrew either. It doesn't read. That's the problem. The problem is how to understand these two words when in grammar they just don't follow one another. Okay? Now, Rashi's first remark is this. The rabbis explained that Reshis can stand for either the Torah or the Jewish people, quoting a verse in the book of Jeremiah, another book of the verse of Proverbs. Reshis can stand for the Torah of the Jewish people. The Beis before Reshis can mean for the sake of, and you should read it for the sake of the Torah of the Jewish people. God created heavens and earth. That's the rabbi's comment. Then Rashi says, if you intend, come with me, to explain it according to his pshat, and then he gives an entirely different explanation. Entirely different explanation. The careful reader says, Rashi, what are you doing? You're dedicating your commentary to pshat. You're explaining your methodology. Fine, great, good. Why do you start with the rabbi's comment, which isn't pshat, and you say it isn't pshat, and then move to pshat? What are you putting it in for? You're not doing that. I claim Rashi's telling you what I just told you 2.5 minutes ago. Rashi's saying, I'm doing pshat. Don't be misled, and don't think that I'm misled. I didn't dedicate myself to pshat because it's truer, more valid, more realistic than any of the other methods of communication. On the contrary, they're all valid, they're all correct, they all are genuine communications from God. When the rabbis comment, for the sake of the Torah or the Jewish people, God created the universe, that's correct. He did that. And those words communicate that idea. They just don't communicate it in pshat. They communicate it in a different dimension. So Rashi is on record putting the rabbis first, giving them pride of place. Number one, to tell you that what they did is genuine, valid, a real communication. Number two, to tell you that when it comes to pshat, that you have to justify on the basis of logic, and the rabbis, what the rabbis say, can't help you. The fact that the rabbis say it, don't give it authority as pshat. Whatever the rabbi said is true, correct, valid, holy, sublime, and everything else, but it may not be pshat. Pshat is something you have to defend logically. And as you will see, as he develops his pshat, Rashi invents a critic who disagrees with him and raises objections against him. Rashi raises the objections to make precisely this point, that this is something which has to be justified on the basis of logic. And Rashi's comment, which he calls pshat, is not found anywhere before him in any of our literature. It's a brand new contribution. Unless he had something oral that we don't know about, but otherwise it's a brand new contribution. Are we together so far? Okay, now what's the pshat? Rashi says you should read this verse as if it had been written Bereshis Baro. Baro in Hebrew, Beis Reish Aleph, same letters, but vowelized differently. Beis Reish Aleph read Baro is what's called in English grammar a gerund. Let's take, for example, jumping. Now try to think carefully. Is jumping a noun or a verb? How can you test whether something's a noun or a verb? One way you test is to try to make it the subject of a sentence. Anything that can be the subject of a sentence is a noun. Let's try. Can jumping be made the subject of a sentence? Jumping is fun. Jumping is dangerous. Jumping pays. Jumping. Sure it can. It's easy. Right? Jumping is called a verbal noun. You take a verb, put ing in the end, and you make it into a noun. By the way, when you put it as a predicate, you got to say John is jumping. You can't say John jumping, because jumping isn't a verb. Is jumping is a verb, but jumping isn't a verb. Jumping is a noun. Okay, how about creating? Creating would be a noun. Same test. Creating is fun, creating is difficult, creating pays. Creating can be the subject of a sentence. So Rashi suggests, read the first two words as, in the beginning of God's creating the heavens and earth. That reads fine, because creating is a noun. So creating can come after the of. The beginning of God's creating reads fine. No problem with that. Okay? It's only one little problem. It doesn't say bro, it says bara. It doesn't say creating, it says created. So what do you mean? Read it as if there are institutions in the world that play with the text and say, don't point it this way, point it that way, change it around, it'll be easier. We don't do that. That's not our style. We don't believe in that. We think that's lying. Rashi says, I know, it isn't written baro, it's written bara. But now I'm putting this in my terminology, but it's Rashi's idea. This is a biblical idiom. When you have a word in construct form, of, and then you have a verb that comes after it, the meaning of the text is, as a gerund, put the ing on and you'll get what the text means. It's an idiom. And he proves it. Because in the second verse of the book of Hosea, it says, Tchilas diber Hashem b'Hosea. Tchilas means the beginning of. Like Reshis means beginning of, Tchilas also means beginning of. Diber is, he spoke. And the same problem. The beginning of, he spoke, excuse me. No, it's the very beginning of the book Hosea. There the text is saying, this is the beginning of God speaking to Hosea. There it's clear what it's got to mean. Rashi says, from there I show you this biblical idiom, and there it's fair for me to read Bereshis bara as the beginning of God's creating heavens and earth. Are we together so far? Okay. Now Rashi says, I know that you're not going to like this. I know that you're not going to like this, and you're going to oppose it. And you're going to oppose it on two grounds. First of all, it's very costly, what I'm telling you. Very costly. And number two, you have another solution. Just as good as mine, just as easy as mine, which doesn't have the same cost. What does it cost? Well, let's compare side by side. What you're used to, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, versus Rashi, in the beginning of God's creating heavens and earth. And let's ask this question. At the end of those words, what punctuation mark belongs? Let's take it the way you're familiar. In the beginning, God created heavens and earth, period. That's a whole sentence. Beginning, God created heavens and earth, period. Then it goes on to describe other things. Now, in the beginning of God's creating heavens and earth, what goes there? A comma. No period can go. It's not a sentence. It's a dependent clause. Okay. So, according to Rashi, that first verse defines some background condition. When was it? In the beginning of God's creating heavens and earth, whenever that was. What was the state of the world? Well, the earth was formless and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and God's Spirit was hovering over the waters. More background. Anything happened yet? It's all background. It's all background. Where are we? Then in verse 3 it says that God said, let there be light, and there was light. The first thing that's created, according to Rashi, is light. Not heavens, not earth, but light. All the other stuff that is already there. Rashi says, I'm not starting from time zero. I'm not starting from time zero. Starting somewhere in the middle of the process of creation. So you're going to lose creation ex nihilo. Creation out of nothing. You're going to lose that. Rashi says, I know you're going to lose it. So what? My job is to explain the literal meaning of the words, and the literal meanings of the words here do not say creation ex nihilo. You asked me about my belief in creation ex nihilo. It comes from Isaiah, it comes from the oral tradition, but these words do not say creation ex nihilo. Yeah. Because the text says, according to Rashi, it reads like this. In the beginning of God's creating heavens and earth, the earth was formless and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and God's spirit hovered over the waters. That's all background. That's where we are standing before the first thing happens. So there's something called the deep, and something called the earth, which is formless and void, and there's something called water. It's all there already. And the first thing that happens is God creates light with all that stuff in the background. We're not starting at time zero. The alternative translation, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, in the beginning is the beginning. Beginning is time zero. Rashi is not reading it that way. So the Rashi says that you, the critic, are going to accuse me of losing creation ex nihilo. That's what you're going to accuse me of, number one. And number two, you're going to explain the text, answer my problem. How can you have beginning of with a verb? You'll explain it also in an equally logical way. Because in the Tanakh, there are elliptical sentences. Elliptical means words are left out. And the text expects the intelligent reader to fill it in. And he gives 4 examples. And the last example uses exactly the word we are talking about. The last example is a verse from Isaiah, where the verse says, Magid mereshis acharis, which literally means God declares from the beginning of, the end of. Period. Reader says, what? Let's try that again. God declares from the beginning of, the end of. Beginning of what? End of what? Well, you're an intelligent reader. Fill it in. Probably from the beginning of everything, God declares the end of everything. It's got everything under control. You're supposed to fill in everything. So the critic says, look, Rashi, you know very well. Throughout the Tanakh, there are places where it expects us to fill in words. And here's the same word you're working with, reshis. And clearly you're supposed to fill in everything. So I'm going to do the same thing over here. Bereshis bara, in the beginning of, fill in everything. In the beginning of everything, God created the heavens and the earth. It's perfectly fair because other verses demand the same thing. Even a verse with this very word, and I get back creation ex nihilo. So why am I not in a better position than you, Rashi? Says Rashi's invented critic. I mean, he made this up. But by the very act of making up a critic, he's telling you, I have to answer objections. I'm not doing this based of authority because someone in the past said so. I'm putting forth a way to explain it. If somebody has a better explanation, I have to give in. I have to give up. Rashi says, but the critic is wrong. Because the critic hasn't taken into account the context. Context is also important in understanding what something says. Now, the second verse mentions the waters. God's Spirit hovered over the waters. Says Rashi to the critic, I challenge you. Where did the waters come according to your translation? Your translation is, in the beginning of everything, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, according to you, where did the waters come from? Now Rashi stops there. I think he's taking into account another piece of information. It's so obvious, I guess he doesn't have to mention it. Someone will say, indeed, he says this, and someone will say, what do you mean, Rashi? In the beginning of everything, God created the heavens and the earth, the globe, the planet, in which there's lots of water. What's your problem? He created the planet with the water in it. Well, let's work on the waters now. So what do you mean, where did the waters come from? God created the heavens and the earth, capital E, the globe, the planet. Yeah, but you see, 5 sentences later, the Torah says, God drew back the waters and revealed the dry land, Adamah, and he called the dry land Eretz. So the word Eretz in this context means dry land. It doesn't mean the globe of the earth. It means dry land. So back to the first verse, when it says, in the beginning God created Shamayim v'aretz, it means he created heaven and dry land. And then there's no place for the water to come in. So Rashi says, your translation, although it is true there are words that are missing, sentences that are missing words, and that in Isaiah, Rashis has to mean beginning of everything, I agree with you, but here it can't mean that because of the context. And therefore, says Rashi, so to speak, I'm right and you're wrong. And that's how Rashi engineers the first comment. From this you see, grammar is important. You've got to satisfy grammar. Comparative text is important. You can go from book to book where the same words are used, and unless there's some other information which cripples you, you have to make sure that it works from book to book. Both he and the critic did that. Furthermore, you have to pay attention to the context, but you don't have to pay attention to your religious commitments. That you don't have to pay attention to. Because giving up creation ex nihilo, these words don't say that. They don't say that. That's all there is to it. They don't say it. So, that's how Rashi introduces his understanding of Pshat. And he's dedicated his translation to doing Pshat. Are we together so far? Okay, now, take down the blue books and I'll show you some more things about it. Some interesting illustrations of how Pshat works. Page 3. That's the beginning. We're still on page 3. Another thing that I want you to learn from these examples is the extent to which, when you have a rabbinic comment, how deeply and carefully the rabbis read the text. And what can sound like something coming out of thin air and just being imagination, if you spend some time working hard and analyzing, you can see that the rabbis paid very careful attention to the text. Look at verse 5. Just the first half of verse 5. God called to the light day. I'm going to change the translation a little bit because it's not exact. God called to the light day, and to the darkness called night. There's no he in the Hebrew. Your helpful, friendly translator threw that in so you could read it smoothly and go to sleep. But the fact is that there's no he in the Hebrew, it's just a verb. The rabbinic comment on this verse is, God associates his name with good and not with evil. God associates his name with good and not with evil. Wow, the writer says, what is going on? What? How could you possibly get a moral like that out of this verse? Look, it's a compound sentence. God called to the light day and to the darkness night. You have any puzzle? Who called to the darkness night? Isn't it God, obviously? George went to the store and bought milk. Who bought milk? George bought milk, obviously. What do you mean he associates his name with one and not the other? What are you talking about? It's a simple compound sentence. Okay, look at verse 4. One line up. God saw that the light was good, and God separated between the light and the darkness. Isn't that a compound sentence? Isn't God the agent in both compounds? But in 4, the word God is repeated. Didn't have to be, but it is. Could have written, God saw the light was good and separated between the light and the darkness without repeating God. But the text did repeat God. So in 4 it does repeat, and in 5 it doesn't repeat. There ought to be a reason for that, don't you think? Okay. Now another clue. Suppose someone said, forget about 4. I'm just looking at 5 for a moment. You know why the 5 doesn't repeat God in the second half? Because it's just economical. It's saving words. They're planning to send this by telegraph, and they don't want to pay for an extra word. That can't be right. That can't be the right explanation of why God is not repeated in verse 5. Why can't that be right?
Well, the number of
Okay, but I said that's true, and we'll have to answer that. But that's when it goes back to 5. It says, okay, I don't know about 4. 4 has its own special reason for whatever reason. It's written in gold. But 5 is economy. It's writing it in the most economical way. Ashen?
So why don't you talk about darkness first?
No, worse than that. Why can't that be right to say that it doesn't repeat God because it's trying to save on words? That can't be the right answer for 5 alone. Why? No. But sometimes you want to be done. See, if you could have written it shorter, then the fact that it's repeated requires some very strong explanation. So I want to know, could it have been written shorter? Is that the motivation of the verse? It can't be. Hint, look at the verb.
Because the verse is actually what a car?
Look at the word, Say again?
Car.
What about it?
Because you said it could be more economical.
Yeah, the verb is the same in both halves also. Both times it's called. If you wanted to make it maximally economical, leave out the verb the second time also. You could have written, God called to the light day and to the darkness night. No, the verse repeats the verb and doesn't repeat the subject. Come on, the verse is telling you something. The verse is telling you the subject missing. I left it out. Okay, so God is being associated with light and not with darkness. Comparing 4 to 5 and realizing that 5 can't be motivated by economy leads to the conclusion that 5 is telling you God is associated with light and not with darkness. Are we together so far? This is not imagination. This is not for the coffee break. This is not, oh, you're so bored, I'll tell you something cute. Now, however, where do we get good and evil here? Well, let's look back up on to the beginning of the page. In the beginning, the translator here uses Rashi's translation. In the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth, when the earth was astonishingly empty, darkness on the surface of the deep, divine presence hovered over the surface of the waters. God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated between the light and the darkness. What did you get from that? That the light is good. It says so. Okay, so the first half definitely is God associating his name with good, because the text explicitly says that light is good. Could we somehow get the idea that darkness is evil, or at least less good than light? How? Say it out.
Since it separates good and it first calls light good, and then it separates it light and darkness, so that it's predicating that the last part of something is bad.
Okay, that's nice. I didn't think of that. That's a nice thought. And I think there's a more basic thought, but that's a nice thought also, because if the light is good and you have to separate it from the darkness, that must mean because the darkness isn't the same character. Good. That's a nice thought. What about the fact that on stage you have light and darkness and deep and waters and all sorts of other things, and God saw that the light was good. End of sentence. Full stop. I think that implies at least that the rest of the things aren't equally good. Otherwise, why call this one good and leave the other ones out? So the rabbi's analysis here is really based on a careful reading of the text. Now, when I first told this to my oldest son, some of which is in the commentator, some of which is mine, he said, but Abba, turn over the page to the next page. And look at verse 10. Verse 10 says, and God called to the dry land earth, and to the gathering of waters called seas. There's no he again. Isn't that exactly the same as 5? I said, yes, it is. And he said, well, but what are you going to tell me? That the earth is good and the seas are bad? I mean, it's the same words. So I said, I'll think about it. I thought about it for a while. And then I thought, maybe yes. Maybe yes. Let's think about the history of the seas. When the planet was created, it was entirely covered with water. There was no place for people to live. So God drew off the waters so that the dry land could appear. And when the human population had to be almost completely destroyed, it was destroyed through flood of water. And when the Jews had to leave Egypt, there was water in the way that had to split. And when the Jews wanted to enter the land of Israel, there was water in the way, the Jordan, which had to stop so they could get through. It does sound like water gets in the way. And indeed, there are verses in Psalms which indicate that the seas would like to reconquer the land. And if you want to think of tsunamis as a kind of expression of that, you're free to do so. So, there is apparently a negative element associated with disease. Now, I pat myself on the back. I thought of this myself. Later, someone showed me a transcript of a shir by Rav Moshe Shapiro Shlita, where he said roughly the same thing and added a couple of more sources. So I thought, okay, well, before I treat it as a speculation, if he says it, then I know it's correct. And the implication from verse 10 is exactly right. It's the same implication as you have in verse 5. God associates his name with the things that are good and doesn't associate his name with the things that aren't good. What it means that he associates is a whole philosophical question, but that's how the text reads. Are we together so far? Okay. Now, take a look at page 31. The background to the flood. These are the offspring of Noach. Noach was a righteous man, perfect or whole or complete in his generations. Noach walked with God. Noach begot, gave birth to 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Yefes. There are a few questions here. Just read it literally, simplistically, on the surface. Don't do anything clever or smart. That's the way I believe you should start to read. Read dumb. Just read the words and ask if they make sense. If you want to do something smart, you always have to justify it by answering a question or something. Otherwise, just read it plain, like I'll have to the New York Times. What strikes you as needing some kind of explanation here, needing some help here to make sense out of it, logical sense out of it? Let them work out. Something strike you here is that just needs some explanation. Well, let's see. These are the offspring of Noach. Who, what, where are the offspring of Noach? What does it say?
The whole sentence is choppy.
It's very choppy, right? Really, if you say these are the offspring, what should follow? The names of his children, right? Now, your helpful French translator did what? He put in dashes. Wasn't that clever of him to set it aside so he wouldn't be too bothered by it? But there are no dashes in the Hebrew. It just reads straight. It's very funny. Why does it do that? Okay. What else would need explanation here?
It seems like it should be 3 different sentences, 3 different psukim. Because it first says, these are the offspring of Noah, then it has the next part of the sentence has nothing to do with the beginning. Noah was a righteous man, perfect in his generation. Then that has nothing to do with the next part of the sentence, Noah walked with God.
Okay, it is a break. Like, I agree, but you can't talk about how many different sentences it is because some of the psukim in the Torah are very long and complicated, and some are very short. But definitely the order here is very peculiar. That's what we were talking about. Yeah.
Is it because it goes from the present of these are the offspring of Noah to the past Noah had begotten 3 sons?
That's an artifact of the English. In the Hebrew, there's no verb. But see, that's fair. That's fair. You're reading English. You have to demand the English makes sense. Then, as often is the case, you have to consult somebody who knows Hebrew to tell you whether it's just an artifact of the English translation or not. Yeah.
2 things. Noah was a righteous man, perfect in his generation. Does that mean he wouldn't be perfect in other generations?
Okay. Let's stop on that for a second. You're already onto something very important. Let me back up and give it a little background, but you're like 2 steps ahead. Your thought is correct. Let's ask, translated as perfect, righteous and perfect. What kind of terms are righteous and perfect? What kind of qualities are they? What kind of descriptions are they? I'll give you a parallel. Suppose I said, you know how tall George is? George is 6'2" in his class. I said, what? 6'2" in his class? I mean, either you are or you aren't. 6'2" is a height, nothing to do with your class. 6'2" is an absolute description, not relative to the class. Perfect and righteous, either you're perfect or you aren't. Either you're righteous or you aren't. Perfect and righteous in his generations. It just puts together 2 things that don't belong together. That's quite right. So he already took a step in a direction. He said, maybe, I'm just putting your thought into my words, maybe when I said perfect and righteous, it doesn't mean really perfect, really righteous, 100% absolute, the way the words are usually used. No, it means compared to the people in his generation, he's more perfect and more righteous. Not really perfect and really righteous, but more perfect and more righteous. That's one way to go. And one of the commentators does take it that way. There's another way to take it, and that is, he's really perfect and really righteous in spite of his generations. He lived in the generations that deteriorated to the flood. People are usually affected by their surroundings. To maintain a high moral standard when everybody else is going to pot, it's not easy. He managed to be perfect and righteous in spite of the fact that his generations were going downhill. And there are actually two commentaries, one each, Rav and Shmuel and Gemara. We'll take it in those two different ways. Are we together? Okay. The answer to the first question, this is very important, is that the word in Hebrew, which your translator says is offspring, doesn't have to mean offspring. Doesn't have to mean offspring. Keep your finger over here, but go back to page 11. Look at verse 4. These are the products of the heaven and the earth when they were created. In the Hebrew, it's the exact same word, toldos. So toldos doesn't have to mean offspring. So Rashi here on 31 says, these are Noach's products. It's what he produced, what he created. Now, what did he create? He was righteous. He was perfect, so to speak. He walked with God. And he had children. His own moral and spiritual character is his own creation. That becomes a very central Jewish teaching. Perfection and righteousness are not gifts from God. You have to make them for yourself. It says, Iker toldosehem shel tzadikim, mitzvos ma'asim tov. The most fundamental things that great people create is their character and their good works. Children also. Children aren't negligible, but they don't compare to moral and spiritual self-perfection. So that's what it means when it says these are the toldos. It means the products of Noach's activity. Okay, having said all of that, explain to me why the name is reproduced. These are the products of Noach. Noach was a righteous man, etc., etc. Why repeat his name? These are Noach's products. What's his first product? Himself. The verse is talking about self-creativity. Self-creativity. The essence of a human being is his moral and spiritual character. In creating your own moral and spiritual character by exercising your free will, you are creating yourself. See how much profound background information is packed into this verse? Okay, now there's one more question that should be asked about this verse. There's a phrase in this verse which doesn't have a clear meaning. Which phrase is that? Noah walked with God. What's that? Strolling together hand in hand in the garden? Probably not. So what does it mean? Surely it's something good. We are praising Noah here, but what kind of good thing is it? Furthermore, let's think again about the two translations of in his generations. One says Noah was really perfect and righteous in spite of his generations. The other says, no, he wasn't really perfect and righteous. Not really. He was only in comparison to his generations. Really, he wasn't. Now, I think we have a problem here. Why would anyone explain these words negatively? Why would anybody use these words to pull him down? Isn't the context praising him? Isn't the context explaining why God chose him to survive when everybody else is going to die? It isn't as if there's no alternative. You have the positive explanation. He was perfect and righteous in spite of his generations. Why would anybody be motivated to opt for another explanation of in his generation, which pulls him down? Sorry, say again? Doesn't have to be competitive. Again, you have. It's not repetitive. You have in his generations. It's explained in two ways. One's positive and one's.
If it's a positive thing.
Yes.
Repetitive.
Not at all. Not. Well, first of all, you can't say it's repetitive if you don't know what it means. If you don't know what walking with God means, you don't know. But its generations, according to the positive explanation, is a statement of extra praise. What he achieved in spite of the fact that the generations were going downhill. That's an important piece of information. The answer is that if you look at these sentences alone, it's hard to justify. But if you look at a few other sentences and get some more information about Noah, you can see that he had certain weaknesses. Noah had certain weaknesses. Turn over the page to 33. I'll just share a few with you. Chapter 7, in the middle of the page, just read verses 1 and 7. 1 and 7, in terms of themselves, and tell me what you see.
They had to go into the ark because of the water. I mean, that they really were forced to go into the ark.
You bet.
Yeah.
Verse 1 says God tells him to go into the ark. And verse 7 says he goes in because the water's up to my neck,
Yeah.
and I'm going to drown. That's very peculiar. Now, you can see that right here. If you know biblical style, this is a problem in spades. Throughout the Tanakh, when somebody's told to do something and he does it, the Tanakh records that in one of two ways. It either says, and he did so, or it repeats. God says, do X, it says, and he did X. Here, to say that he went in for a different reason altogether is very peculiar. You don't write that. When a person follows orders, you simply say he followed orders. So this is a weakness. He went in only because the waters were rising. Now I'm going to show you something subtle. Look at the top of the page, verse 18. There's going to be a flood, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall enter the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. I claim that that's weird. That's weird. No one today would ever write anything like that. What's weird here? I'm really weird. Nothing subtle. It's right on the surface.
I think his wife should have come after him. Or
How about the order, boys and girls? You and your sons?
then your wife.
And your wife and your wife's sons? That's very peculiar. Your son's wives. That's very peculiar. The order is very peculiar. Now look down again at the bottom of the page, verse 7. How did it go when they went in?
His sons, his wife. Yeah.
That's right. Men to the front of the bus, women to the back of the bus. You know, get rid of the women. Okay. Let's turn a few pages and see what happens when they come out. Verse 39 to page 39. Verse 16 in the middle of the page.
You and your wife from the ark. You and your. He's telling you.
Wow, what's going on? What's going
Hashem
on?
is telling the correct order.
So, the commentators say the most obvious thing, most on the surface thing, when they went into the ark, God was telling them men and women separate. The whole world is going down the drain.
Yeah.
Don't you engage in normal life, and especially in procreation. Now is the time of destruction. Go in separate. Come out together. That's what 16 says. Proof. Look at 17 on 39. Every living being that is with you, of all flesh, birds, animals, moving things that move on the earth, order them out with you, and let the team on the earth be fruitful and multiply on the earth. That's the project. Refill the earth. Okay? Now look at 18 on page 39.
Again, it's Noah, his sons, his wife.
Yeah, we're back to the original order. What happened? Answer, they didn't do it. They didn't do it. God indicated to them that now is the time to get back together and repopulate the earth, and they refused to do it. Now, why they refused to do it is a long story, and there's more textual indications, but you're beginning to see certain weaknesses in Noah. The final example, I'm skipping over other stuff, but let's take a look at 43. After they come out of the ark, verse 20 at the bottom of the page, Noah, the man of the earth, debased himself, planted a vineyard, he drank of the wine and became drunk, and became uncovered. Where the translators got the idea of uncovered himself, I don't know. That's not a correct translation. Became uncovered in his tent. Noah ends up a drunk. Now that's shocking. The man who's chosen along with 7 others, and largely in his merit, to survive the flood, and he ends up drunk. So Noach definitely has weaknesses. So back to page 31, where that commentator says maybe in his generations should be taken as a degrading of his performance, as a lowering of his righteousness, he has what to rely on. It's not just out of the blue, because we have indications that Noach has weaknesses. All right, we're together? I'll tell you one more thing. There's a little, it's somewhat in the text, and there's a support for it, and some of it's in Rashi. Let's take a look at this ark. 13. God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me. The earth is filled with robbery through them. Behold, I'm about to destroy them from the earth. Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make the ark with compartments and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you should make it. 300 cubits. Page 31. 300 cubits, the length of the ark. How big is a cubit? It's not a quantum bit of information. It's about 20 inches, 18, 20, 22 inches, something like that. 300 cubits is 450 feet. That's a big boat. Even Donald Trump will be happy with the book that's 450, right? 50 cubits wide, that's something like 85, 90 cubits feet wide. 30 cubits is height, again, something like 70, 80 feet high, 8 stories, 7 stories high. It's a gigantic boat. The commentators, the medieval commentators, ask, what did he need the boat for? Now you'll say, what do you mean? What do you need the boat for? The flood coming. Excuse me, the all-powerful creator of the universe is taking care of him. Does he need a box? Indeed, Nachmanides says the box is too small. You don't need modern geologists and anthropologists and zoologists to tell you there are too many species of beetle. Ha ha, how's he going to put all the beetles in? Oh ho, it's all a story. 800 years ago, the Ramban asked that question. It said, we're talking about a miraculous sequence, so the box held everything also miraculously. We're not talking about natural history now. But what does he need the box for? Now listen to Rashi's explanation. Rashi says, God told him to build the box so that he's going to build this box. It's going to take a long time, decades and decades. People are going to ask him, what are you doing? What are you doing? It's a big project. You're just spending year after year after year on this project. And he's going to tell them, because of your evil, a flood is coming. Maybe they'll turn around. Might do tshuva. Maybe they'll turn around. Listen again. God tells them to build the box because when they see him building the box, they'll ask him what he's doing. It does attract attention. And he'll say, I'm building it because there's going to be a flood, because of your evil. Maybe they'll turn around. What does this tell you about Noach's character, about his psychology?
That he wasn't going to say anything unless people asked him.
B'diuk. God has to provoke him into the limelight where people ask him, so he'll answer. Without that, he's not going to say a word. Isn't that a little peculiar? Is that a little peculiar? If God tells you that he's about to destroy the entire world because of their evil, wouldn't you think that he would try to do something about it without being provoked? Now, that's Rashi. But there is a hint to this in the text. He doesn't pray for them. He doesn't question God. He doesn't object to God. What happens when God tells Abraham that 5 little cities in Canaan are going to be destroyed? Abraham is up in arms and he has a whole objection and he has a whole philosophy and argument with God for 5 little cities. Here's the whole world, and Noach is silent. It's your world. Do as you please. That's very funny. It's very funny. It's another expression of weakness in Noach. So the one who says that in his generations means to reduce his praise has what to rely upon. Now I want to answer the last question that I raised. That'll be enough for tonight. What does it mean he walked with God? Now there are 2 ways to do this. One way is, let's think up an explanation. That's nuts. There are 1,000 pages of Tanakh. First thing you want to know is this phrase used anywhere else? Yeah, it is. Just a few pages before. You don't have to go very far. Take a look on page 25. On 25, you have the begats. the boringest stuff in the entire Torah. But as usual, every word, every letter, every element has something to teach. Take a look at verse 6. The begats on this page come in groups of 3. Shes lived 105 years, we got Enosh. Shes lived 807 years after getting Enosh, we got sons and daughters. All the days of Shes were 912 years, and he died. First the designated successor, then the rest of his life with sons and daughters, and then a sum up, total. Enosh lived 90 years. We got Canaan. Enosh lived 850 years after getting Canaan, got sons and daughters. Days of Enosh was 905 years, and he died. And so it goes. Till you get to 21, at the bottom of the page, Chanoch. Here you don't have 3 verses, you have 4 verses. And you have a little more detail. Chanoch lived 65 years and begot Meshuselach. That's like the first verse of all the trios. Chanoch walked with God. That's what we're looking for, right? Chanoch walked with God for 300 years after begetting Meshuselach. He got sons and daughters. All the days of Chanoch were 365 years, and Chanoch walked with God. Second time, twice. Did we forget it from 2 lines ago? Why did the text have to say it again? Then he was no more, for God had taken him. So obviously, walking with God is very prominent here. Now let's put in another fact. How long did Chanoch live? 365 years. Let's see if he's getting a good deal. Verse 20. Yared got 962. 17. Mahalalel got 895. 14. Canaan got 910. 11. Enosh got 905. 8. Shes got 912. Doesn't it look like Chanoch got shortchanged a bit? And don't tell me that that was the decline, because on the next page you have Meshuselach, who in verse 27 lives 969 years, more than everybody else. So obviously Chanoch got shortchanged. He got 600 years chopped off. What is going on over here? Could it be related to walking with God? Could that possibly be related to the fact that his life was so short? Let's look again. 21. Chanoch lived 65 years, we got Meshuselach. Chanoch walked with God for 300 years after getting Meshuselach, sons and daughters. That sounds neutral. He did. Don't know why we're saying it. Another 300 years. All the days of Chanoch were 365. Shock, surprise, astonishment. How come so little? Chanoch walked with God, and then he was no more. Doesn't say he died, like all the other ones. Doesn't say he died. So there was no more, for God took him. That doesn't indicate dying, at least in the normal way. And 24, by repeating he walked with God, makes it clear it's because he walked with God that God took him. That's the cause of God's taking him. That much is in the verses on the surface. The Midrash fills it in the following way. Some great people have the ability to stand on their own, even against a negative environment. They're individualists, they have a strong backbone, and they can stand and face the crowd. Some people can't. Some people need support. Chanoch needed support. Chanoch needed an attachment with God, which he could lean in the face of the growing evil of the generations as they went by. God says to Chanoch, the world is collapsing, the world is deteriorating, it's going to come to a point where you can't withstand it anymore. I'm taking you early so you shouldn't collapse. I know your intentions are good, I know your desires are good, your hopes are good. I'm taking you before you collapse. Now, what does it say about Noah? He walked with God. You see now that that's a mixed description. It's not bad to walk with God, but it also indicates a certain weakness in the person. Final piece of evidence. Take a look on page 73. Chapter 17. You read the first verse and tell me what you see that's relevant to what we've been talking about. Walk before me. Not walk with me, but walk before me. Noah walked with God. Chanoch walked with God. God says to Abraham, walk before me. And I think there's a reasonable piece of evidence. I wouldn't call it a proof or anything compelling, but it's a reasonable piece of evidence. If you want to know what God is in favor of, what God wants from people. In case of Noach and Chanoch, it just says that's what they did. That's what, in fact, they did. Here, God tells Abraham, this is what I want. I want you to walk before me. Walking before God is superior to walking with God. The Midrash says it's like a father walking through the forest with two sons, one younger, one older. The younger one wants to hold his father's hand. As long as he's holding his father's hand, he's okay. The older one, he could say, go to the top of the hill, climb the tree, come back and tell me what you see. And the older one can do that. So walking with God is equivocal. It's praise, but it indicates weakness and dependency, and therefore it also indicates that Noach's position on page 31 at the beginning of the story is a position that is equivocal. And that's more grist for the mill of the one who wants to say in his generations, reduces, modifies the praise. At any rate, I hope to have shown you two things tonight. Number one, the logical study of the Torah bears a lot of fruit, endless fruit, number one. And number two, when you have rabbinic comments, or the comments of the commentators like Rashi, it's in the text. It's in the text. And if you don't see how it's connected to the text, that's because you don't see it. Rashi's commentary, there are over 100 commentaries on Rashi's commentary. Indeed, there's a copy of the 5 books of Moses, which is printed with Rashi and the 11 major super commentaries on Rashi. And what they're doing most of the time is figuring out what problem bothered Rashi and how do his words solve that problem. It's a very sophisticated, logical, rigorous study. And if you're studying it, call it.